They told me, in the whispered way people warn each other about weather or debt, to stay out of the East Wing. I didn't listen, or maybe I thought I could listen and still be brave. The first thing I remember is the smell, antiseptic fighting with something older, a sweet rot like fruit left in the sun. It clung to the corridor, thick as a curtain, and every step I took through that smell felt like wading into someone else's dream. I was there because of a story. Not the kind that lives on paper, but the kind that pulsed at the edges of towns. A rumor about a closed ward, a name scratched into memory. I told myself I was chasing truth. In truth, I was chasing an adrenaline that muffled the small, sensible voice in my chest. The building itself seemed to breathe. The boards beneath my feet sighed and settled as if relieved by my presence. The lights were low, and the whole place had the grain and color of an old film. Reds bleeding into sepia, edges softened by dust. At the end of the hall was a door with paint flaking like thin scales. Someone had carved a sign into the glass. N, only. The hyphen looked like a missing thought. I remember pausing, fingers pressed to the cool wood, hearing my heartbeat in my throat. That's when I heard the humming, not from a machine, but from a place behind the door, low and constant, like someone singing under their breath to keep from going silent. I pushed it open. The room was awash of shadow and trembling lamplight. A figure stood to the right, half in shadow, perfectly still. At first I thought it was a mannequin, a nurse's uniform, skirt creased, cap perched at an awkward angle. Then the light caught the face, and my brain stalled on the wrong answer. It wasn't a face at all. It was a mask, animal and human at once. A pig's snout, dark hollow eyes beneath. The skin of the mask cracked as if it had been left on a radiator too long. The thing wore a nurse's apron, and when it tilted its head, the movement was patient, as if it had all night to think about the next thing it would do. I speak in the present tense now, because saying it in past makes it more like a story and less like a warning. The mask's mouth didn't move, but I could feel a silence fold itself around me, heavy and deliberate. For a moment, I thought of television thrillers, of staged frights. I laughed, a dry, small sound swallowed by the room. That laugh felt indecent, like laughing in a church. The figure's head moved, slowly, deliberately, and with that motion, a little sound came from somewhere. A cloth dragged over wood, or fingernails over a file. It was close enough that the instinct to flee rose like bile, sharp and immediate, but something else kept me rooted. A stubborn curiosity, or the stupid hope that if I stepped forward, I would peel back the illusion and find an explanation. I stepped. The floor complained, the mask tilted, the humming stopped. When the humming cut out, the room didn't so much fall silent as gather itself into a listening shape. My breath sounded wrong, too loud, too human, and somewhere behind me the old building resumed its slow creaks, like someone shifting in a faraway bed. I backpedaled without meaning to, one heel catching on the threshold. The nurse, the thing with the pig's mask, did not move its feet. It only turned its head as if to consider me, as if I were a question posed in the margins of its patience. I tell you this now with the same embarrassment I felt then. My curiosity was a physical thing. It pressed at my ribs, a needy animal. I moved closer, saying under my breath that I would touch the mask, would rip it off, and prove what I already suspected, that it was rubber, or papier-mâché, or a grotesque prank sewn together from old hospital supplies. My hand hovered near the apron and landed on coarse linen. It was warm, not an inert prop, but something recently worn, something that had answered the body's heat. The nurse's head tilted again, and in its hollow eyes I saw a reflection that was not mine. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw other faces, distant, layered like old negatives stacked in a dark room, but maybe it was only the dull gleam of the mask catching the lamp. The room smelled stronger now, copper under the sweet rot, like dried blood warmed by breath. A whisper threaded the air, barely audible, syllables that might have been words if I had listened longer. Keep quiet. I spun toward the doorway. The corridor was empty, but for the warped sign, N only. The hum restarted low and under everything, but it was no longer a single sound. It multiplied into soft footsteps, patient and deliberate, shuffling in time with my heartbeat. From somewhere deeper in the ward, a radio crackled, then died. I felt watched from every direction and from none at all. The built-in cameras of imagination and fear suddenly awake. There were rooms along the hall, doors cracked, chalk scrawls on plaster. I pulled one open and a stale room breathed out a history. A small cot with neat folded sheets, a diary with its pages stuck together by humidity, an old tray with a single pill, pale and chalky. On the bedside table, a chart lay splayed open, patient names listed in a hand that trembled at the edges. I read mine. Not the name I carry now, but a name that felt like a borrowed skin. Dates, 11/10. Diagnosis, delusions of observation. Notes, patient reports voices masked as nurses. Frequent sleepwalking. My hands were shaking so badly that the letters pried apart and blurred into motion. Memory is a clever thief. It hides the important bits and leaves you with impressions like knots. I remember a lullaby hummed too low to be human, a metallic smell of something being sharpened, and the sudden sickening awareness that the corridor had rearranged itself. The door I had entered through no longer led to the hallway I knew, but to a narrow stair that descended into a blue darkness, the kind that seems to absorb light instead of reflecting it. I descended because leaving felt worse than falling into whatever waited below. With each step, the air grew cooler, and the scent of antiseptic thinned into something colder, ammonia and old paper. The stairwell ended at a door with no handle, only a small rectangular opening cut at eye level. Through it, I saw movement, a procession of errands done in slow motion. White caps, starched aprons, hands folded as if in prayer. They were not in a hurry. Hurry would be a concession to the narrative of the living. These figures moved like those who have practiced patience for decades. One of them stopped and looked directly at the peephole. For a second, I thought it looked straight at me. For a second, I thought I felt my name being pronounced without sound. Then it lifted a hand and placed it flat against the glass from the other side. The palm was narrow and long-fingered. Where a ring might have been, there was only a dark bruise. A sound, not quite a knock, not quite a sigh, came from the other side, a measured tap, tap, tap. I pressed my palm to the glass on my side, mirroring it, because the world felt better when motion matched motion. The glass was cold and wet with condensation from both breaths. For an instant, our palms aligned. I could have sworn I felt the faintest vibration pass through the barrier, like a whisper that shook the bones. The tapping paused. The figures retreated, folding back into the corridor like a tide pulling under the moon. Somewhere above me, the building exhaled, and I understood with a clarity that was both terrifying and clinical. I was not the only one who sought this place at night. It was a place that sought its own. When I stood, the stair behind me vanished into a wall that had never been there. The sing-song rhythm of humming, low, expectant, rose to meet me. I was not being observed anymore. I was being considered. When the humming swelled, it was no longer a background note but a language. It had syntax and pauses, the way a person arranges a sentence to hide the knife. My palms prickled where they had pressed to the glass. The condensation had dried in the shape of my hand like a ghost print. I remember thinking absurdly that I could still choose, that I could step back, leave the building, call someone who would laugh and advise me never to go near that place again. The choice felt like a costume I could peel off, but choices in that place were thinner than paper. The corridor opened up around me, no longer linear, but a small planet of rooms folding into each other. Doors leaned in and whispered. I walked because walking was an argument against immobility. I walked because my legs still belonged to me. Voices threaded along the skirting boards. Not human speech, but the texture of speech. A breath here, the soft rattle of a name there. The air tasted of metal and soap. Lamps hummed like attentive insects. I found the archive by mistake, a door labeled records that had not been there when I first arrived. It swung inward on a hinge that sighed as if waking. Inside were shelves pressed close like ribs, each row a ledger of small, precise horrors. Notebooks, jars, boxes, each tagged with a date and a name. On a metal table lay hundreds of masks, thin animal faces, some stitched with careful hands, some smudged with the dust of long sleep. There were pig masks, like the one I had seen, and cat masks, masks shaped with such tender cruelty that my stomach unclenched and then clenched again. At the far end of the room, a record player stood beneath a lamp, a single vinyl spinning with a patience I found unbearable. The needle caught in a loop, and a voice, my voice, impossibly, began to speak from the vinyl, as if it were reading from a diary I had not yet written. I staggered to it, and the sound hit me in the same place that memory does, under the sternum, where facts become beliefs. It recited my laugh, the way I said the names of my parents, phrases I would never have shared with anyone. The voice was dry and patient and unmistakably mine. My first thought was technical. Someone had recorded me and cataloged my words. Then the rationality cracked. The record did not contain only my words. It contained scraps of other people's confessions, frightened mutterings, apologies, the syllables of names spoken as if calling someone home. Each record sat patiently on the shelf as if it had waited its turn to be played. The masks lay nearby as if to listen. The whole room felt like a throat. A movement at the doorway made me whirl. The nurse, the pig-masked thing, stood in the threshold along with others. A thin woman with a bird beak, a man whose face was a smooth, blank canine. They did not come closer. They only arranged themselves in the light, steady as a battery of witnesses. One of them reached for a mask on the table and set it on its own face with a ceremony like a blessing. The mask was not a disguise. It was an apparatus. When the mask settled, the figure's shoulders drooped, as if something heaved out of its chest and left a hollow. It clicked then, in the sensible part of my brain that demands explanation, that these masks were not props but vessels. The record player, the ledgers, the masks. They constituted a system for storing something that could not be kept on paper. They kept voices. They kept names. They kept the parts of people that talk in the night and say the things that must not be repeated aloud. The nurses preserved silence by collecting the noisy pieces of a person and putting them somewhere where they could be visited but not heard in the open. I felt like a child who understands a parent's secret and fears how it will be used, that I had been cataloged from the moment curiosity pried my latch. The nurse in the pig mask lifted a hand and pointed at the ledger that bore my name. Its finger was long, and the tip came away with a subtle smear of something dark. I wanted to rip the book from the shelf, to tear the spine and scatter the pages, but my hands would not obey the urgency of the feeling. They obeyed inertia. Instead, they reached for a mask. It felt like a surrender at first. I told myself I would hold it up, inspect it, tear it, show them I was not afraid. My fingers found the mask, and it was warm as if someone had just taken it off. A gust of breath, theirs or the building's, stirred the hair on my forearm. When I lifted it, a smell poured out, old breath, the mint of hospital floors, the small, sweet rot that had started this whole night. My throat went dry. One of the nurses stepped forward and closed my hand around the mask. It did not take, it guided. Their touch was precise, like the brush of a surgeon. The moment the mask touched my skin, the room tilted. There was a pressure in my ears, and then a wash of other people's memories, quick and pungent as lemon, a child's lullaby, the snap of a door, the smell of lemon soap, a quiet apology said too late. They poured into me like water into a cup, and simultaneously something left me, like heat slipping from a stone into the night. I felt my voice thin and thread-like, then fray into a thread that was snipped without ceremony. I tried to scream and found the sound missing its freight, an empty vessel rattling. The nurse adjusted the mask with a tenderness that made everything worse. It was not cruelty, but a ritual of care perfected into a jail. The ledger beside me recorded the time with the dull, indifferent hand of administration. The record player skipped and played my voice like a verse from a song I could no longer join. They sat me in a chair under the lamp, and one by one, they returned to their places in the corridor. The room folded its ribs back into place, the door shut with a soft, final sound. Alone, with the mask warm and breathing against my face, I sensed that the building had replaced the part of me that liked to ask questions with something quieter, more patient. The nurse had not silenced me out of malice, but out of a kind of service, to keep the ward tidy of noise, to prevent certain truths from walking into daylight where they can rot someone's life. Hours, days, time thinned into the cadence of the hum. I learned to listen. Not to the way people speak, but to the way the building corrals thought. Short shutters at the base of the stair, the sighing of pipes like stifled laughter. Sometimes someone came to the glass and pressed a hand, and for a second I felt a communion pass through the barrier, a current of recognition that said, "We are still here." Other times, the records played my words, and they sounded like someone reading a history of a stranger. I write this now because writing is an imitation of speaking, and some part of me resists being entirely cataloged. Perhaps someone will read this ledger someday and understand that the ward does not merely hide things, it arranges them into a piece that is terrible and coherent. I cannot promise you an escape. I cannot promise you a single path that runs out to sunlight. My warning is the shape of what remains. Be careful which doors you choose, and be careful how loud you are with your curiosity. They taught me how to listen. I am behind the glass.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.